Good morning or afternoon. My name is Madison Gilmore. Before we get started, I have a few quick housekeeping notes. If you have a question during today's presentation, please submit it using the chat feature. We'll do our best to address questions during the webinar, but if we're unable to get to your question, I'll connect you directly to the speakers afterwards. Today, we're offering CLE credit in all states and CE credit in all states except for Georgia and Washington State. To receive CE or CLE credit, you must remain logged in for the entire hour and answer all 3 polling questions. These will appear as pop-ups at various points throughout the presentation. You must answer these while each poll is open. If the poll closes before you submit your response, you will not be eligible to receive credit, so please make sure you're paying close attention. Following the webinar, the CEU Institute will contact you directly for any additional information that's needed. Welcome, and with that, I'll turn it over to our Director of Business Development, Yogi Letfis.
Thank you, Madison. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. For today's session, best practices in forensic investigation. During today's presentation, we'll explore the life cycle of cyber intrusion, discuss today's evolving threat landscape and incident response best practices, and examine the critical role legal counsel plays in helping organizations respond effectively to cyber incidents. We're delighted that you can join us today, and I hope you find today's session both insightful and practical. We have 2 outstanding presenters with us today who bring a wealth of real-world experience and expertise, and I'm excited to introduce them to you all today. And I'm looking forward to them sharing their knowledge with us. First up, we have Todd Rowe, who is a partner and a member of the Constangy Cyber Team. Todd advises clients on data breach response, cybersecurity, privacy compliance, and cyber insurance. Drawing on more than 20 years of litigation experience, Todd helps organizations navigate incidents involving ransomware, social engineering, and business email compromise. Todd is admitted to practice in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois, an achievement made even more impressive by the fact that he has never taken a bar exam. Todd proudly considers himself a lawyer who successfully avoided the bar exam not once but 3 times. Todd, I'm sure you can tell us more about that at another date. A little known fact also is Todd has a small collection of late 80s skateboards, so maybe he'll share that with you one day as well. Todd is joined today by Devon Ackerman, Global Lead of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at LevelBlue. With more than 25 years of cyber security experience, including many years as an FBI special agent and digital forensics examiner. Devon's passion lies in advising, investigating, and guiding victims of cyber incidents. Devon is also the author of a book, I'll give it a plug for you, Devon, Diving In, an Incident Responder's Journey, which focuses on his experiences dealing with cyber threats. In his free time, which I understand from his team he does not have much of, he loves a good escape room, and he has successfully solved over 50 escape rooms, and he loves finding new and unique escape rooms to try. So if you've got any suggestions for him, please feel free to send them his way. I want to thank you both for joining us today, and Devon, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Yogi, for the intro. It is an absolute pleasure to be talking with all of you today. So we're going to talk first as a kind of a baseline. What does the wonderful acronym DFIR even truly mean? You probably know it stands for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. Some people pronounce it as DFIR. Some people pronounce it as DFIR. Doesn't matter, whatever your preference is. Let's talk for a minute about what the 2 pieces actually mean, at least from my perspective. Digital forensics is a scientific discipline. Just like your favorite CSI type show, in 60 minutes, there's a crime, they solve it, and what do they typically talk about? Some type of forensics analysis, whether it's video cameras and they're zooming in or it's blood splatter analysis, whatever that is, digital forensics is also a scientific discipline. The branch of forensic science, as you see on your screen, that governs acquisition, verification, the analysis, and then the presentation of data, traditionally and typically for a court of law. Now, much of what we do in modern DFIR, digital forensics and response, never sees the inside of a courtroom, but it does not mean that we do not still adhere to digital forensic science best practices. Incident response. So if we have digital forensics as the baseline, the scientific discipline to which we practice and exercise and execute on our craft, then you have incident response. We are all incident responders. Those of us that respond to an incident are incident responders. When you couple that, though, with DF, digital forensics, then you have the consulting business, the consulting practice of digital forensics incident response, in which you are responding to an incident where someone has had an intrusion, someone has had a loss of data, which we're going to talk about today, by some unauthorized third party. And because of that, now there's risk to data, there's a resulting business interruption event, and we are leveraging digital forensics to do the investigation and respond to the incident, to ultimately understand what was viewed, what was accessed, what was acquired, because that presents perfectly then to exactly what the legal analysis needs to be to guide clients and victims of cyber events. Next slide. Our first polling question.
Yes. The first polling question is, how confident are you that your organization could determine what data was actually accessed or acquired during a cyber incident? A, very confident. B, somewhat confident. C, not very confident. D, unsure. Question again. How confident are you that your organization could determine what data was actually accessed or acquired during a cyber incident? A, very confident. B, somewhat confident. C, not very confident. And D, unsure. We'll give you a few seconds to answer those questions. Madison, how are we looking on time for answering?
Got about 20 more seconds.
The polling question should be up on your screen. If it's not, if a couple of you have made comment, please look and make sure that you don't have your pop-ups blocked. Sometimes on cell phones or iPads, it doesn't pop up because they're blocked.
Alrighty, I'll go ahead and end this one. If you are not seeing it, if you'll go ahead and put your answer into the chat, that will help us as well with your CE and CLE.
Awesome. Okay, Devon, what do you think about those answers? Todd, any comments? We had 36% at very confident, 47% at somewhat confident, 11% at not very confident, and 6% at unsure.
So I love the answers. I love the polling. What I will kind of give from this perspective, I want to hand it over to Todd, is one of the most interesting aspects of modern enterprises, modern small businesses, is the places where you find data where you don't expect it. And so I love the confidence in the poll answers. I think from an experience standpoint, we often find where our clients may think they know where all the data is, but unfortunately employees and butts in seats still do things that sometimes the business is not aware of. And that leads us to interesting places where data is stored. Todd, your thoughts?
Hey everybody, how are you doing? Yeah, I can't agree with you more, Devon, especially from a legal perspective. To the extent that we do see that confidence from clients, and we like that confidence, but once we get in there, we do see things like data inventory or other types of techniques that could have helped and sort of really sort of supported that confidence reasonably. So 100%, not just, the confidence is great. We always want to see that, but we also want to see a good support for that confident feeling and that you're doing the correct things from data hygiene perspective to make sure that you're not going in overconfident, which can be more of a problem. So agree with you 100% on that. So let's talk a little bit more. And, I think, Devon, that was great, sort of the perspective that you gave us, especially from somebody on the legal side of things who will admittedly be, if it's not readily apparent, the most technical person. So, and I think that's always a nice interplay that we have between forensics and legal counsel, is understanding sort of where our weaknesses are, where our strengths are, and bringing that to the table to, provide that to the client. So talking a little bit about why forensics is near and dear to my heart as legal counsel. So obviously we have a number of tools at our disposal to assist the client in putting together that good response. And I think that we could easily say that digital forensics, especially when we have somebody at the caliber of Devon, is our most vital tool that we have at our disposal. So talking a little bit about our reliance on digital forensic resources as we work through an engagement, I think that we can say that forensics really sheds light on providing factual findings for us so that we can take those factual findings and then talk to our clients a little bit more about what are the consequences of those findings and work them through the engagement to make sure that they're getting back to where they need to be after an incident. So one thing that is vital, I think, from the digital forensic side that we can't do as counsel on the factual findings is getting that good sort of chain of events together. What happened? How did things happen chronologically? And then, taking that information and determining what do we need to do as a result of that. So that's something that we're relying on forensics to assist us on before we can do our magic and provide legal guidance. We need to understand exactly what happened and how it happened. Another thing that I think we really rely on the forensic side of things for their findings would be to just lend credibility to those sort of that chain of events that happens. Lawyers, of course, and perhaps our clients will sometimes speculate as to what happened. If we can get forensics in there to really take a close look at things, then we got a better chance of really knowing what happens, and that brings credibility to the entire response. And more from a legal side of things down the road, we hope, of course, we don't see litigation, but really the digital forensics ends up becoming a lot like just an expert witness that we would use in any type of case, whether you have, one of the a court case that you would see on television where you're trying to get an expert to offer an opinion on some issue that isn't necessarily in the public knowledge. That's where forensics can help us on an incident like this. So talking a little bit more too on our sort of our next category there about evidence. One thing, the next slide back. Sorry, I was just kind of moving through lack of direct evidence. One thing that is sort of we really can get a good assistance from forensics is just evidence preservation, that chain of custody. And what we're talking about there, and we'll talk about this a little bit more down the road, but making sure that we're preserving evidence so that we can go back and use it so that that evidence isn't tampered with and can give us good findings and results. So that's a place where obviously forensics is vital. Finally, one unfortunate aspect with our engagements would be ending up in sort of a regulatory phase or business obligations, whether or not your clients have some sort of contractual obligation to customers. One way that they might be able to meet those contractual obligations when there is an unfortunate incident that unfolds on them is to have real sort of investigation and real data to back that up. And that's where forensics can really assist us in going to those customers and saying, we have this third party who's gone in and done this analysis. Obviously, that once again brings credibility to that picture, but it also sort of weeds out bias. When you're talking to regulators or customers about an incident that your client has sustained, it's sometimes the next question is was this done internally? And there's always those issues that you see with internal forensics as far as making sure that they're covering, the question about whether they're covering issues and things like that, that could have been their fault from the internal IT perspective. So, and then finally, there's always that methodology that the forensics folks bring, so that when we're going and we're talking to regulators or customer or clients, customers, we're not just saying here's what we found. We can also talk a little bit about the methodology that Devon spoke about, and here's how we got to those findings. So always useful there. And now talking a little bit more about what our role as legal counsel is to, depending on how you're viewing it, either supplement forensics or sort of, create the framework for forensics to work in. Let it be said, the initial response to an incident can be chaotic. So like we said, forensics can provide that chronology and let us know exactly what happened, sort of maybe iron out those wrinkles and sort of figure out where we are on that chaotic event to sort of bring that sort of center back and help us, once again, as legal counsel, make good decisions for our clients. So one of the things that obviously we talked about a moment ago is chain of custody. And I think that's so important to sort of have digital forensics there in treating evidence to make sure that it's not being tampered with, that we're going to get those good results that allows the client to decide what their next steps are, perhaps what they can do down the road to hopefully do their best to avoid a situation such as this. So one good source, and we can't really go into it here, but I did provide the link, is CISA. So they do provide a really good sort of information on chain of custody and what you should be doing. So definitely take a look at that. If you need a link from us, after this, please reach out to our team. We'd be happy to give that to you. So next up, our role also as legal counsel will be to sort of set that framework for forensics to make sure that we're looking at the evidence properly, preserving that data, making sure that we're keeping it in a way that will be used later on, whether it be a regulatory scheme or perhaps even litigation, if that results. Making sure that we keep the integrity of that data in place is something that legal counsel can assist with on what the parameters may be for that. But we are really looking to forensics to fulfill that and keep that evidence in a good state. So finally, collaboration with counsel and forensics will create that good strategy. A little bit of perhaps maybe right side, left side of brain to some degree, where forensics wants to do things in a certain way. And it's always important for legal to step in and say, yes, we know you want to do it that way, but here's some of the issues that we're looking at that could impact us from perhaps a liability standpoint or something else down the road. So, making sure that, like we said, we're getting those good forensic findings, but we're also keeping them in context that may not come back and hurt the client unnecessarily. So just wanted to jump in and give that legal perspective.
Perfect. That rolls us into polling question number 2. Which phase of cyber intrusion typically occurs immediately before data exfiltration or ransomware deployment? A. Initial intrusion. B. Persistence and internal reconnaissance. C. Vulnerability scanning. D. Patch management. Read that again. What phase of a cyber intrusion typically occurs immediately before exfiltration or ransomware deployment? A. Initial intrusion. B. Persistence and internal reconnaissance. And C. Vulnerability scanning. Or D. Patch management. Single choice on this one, and we'll give you a little time.
While everyone's working on the Polling question. Todd, I just saw an interesting question come in. At what point should legal be involved? Usually cyber insurance brings in forensics right away. Legal doesn't usually get involved until later, if at all. I certainly want Todd to answer the legal part of this. My experience, and I imagine I saw some friendly names pop up in the participant list that are from other forensics consultancies as well. I think our normal experience is that we love having legal in from day zero for a couple of reasons. We like seeing the tripartite relationship. We like having legal counsel provide answers to risk and to questions that are not in our lane, right? We are forensics specialists. We're going to help with containment. We're going to help with threat actor rejection. We're going to help with IT, answering IT things. But logically, there's going to be questions. Can we overwrite this data? Do we need to preserve this data? Hey, we have third-party contracts. We have third-party legal relationships. We have B2B relationships. What do we do with that? And that should not be our lane from a forensics perspective. Todd, your thoughts?
Yeah, developing that and jumping off that. Legal loves to answer questions. So it's great for us to be there and be able to provide that guidance as soon as possible. In addition to providing, guidance as soon as possible, obviously we want to be there from a practical standpoint to make sure that we are, exerting privilege wherever we can to make sure that those findings right from the start are going to be protected. If we see litigation or some sort of regulatory proceeding down the road, we want to make sure that we have counsel in there to assert privilege and make sure that those findings are protected as soon as possible. So I know we got the polling responses and everybody really wants to jump into those rather than listen to a lawyer. So I'll yield to those.
Thank you, you too. We have 19% at initial intrusion. We have 65% persistence and internal reconnaissance, 17% vulnerability scanning, and 0% at patch management. Any comments on those, Devon?
I love the fact that the leading answer is the correct one. Persistence and internal reconnaissance. We're going to talk about the path of intrusion here in a second. I actually kind of like the fact that we also included vulnerability scanning because it's a little bit of a red herring, and I can actually see why that was answered that way because threat actors do sometimes look for vulnerabilities once they're in. So that was a clever one. Initial intrusion, as we're going to talk about in just a second, I think that's a perfect segue to one of our future slides, is typically phase 1 or stage 1. Let's keep going. And there we go. So let's talk about the path of intrusion. There are lots of ways, lots of opinions on describing the story, walking through the story of what a threat actor does, an unauthorized intruder, when they do their intrusion. So what we're going to talk about or frame this is kind of the way LevelBlue does it. The path of intrusion is a 5-phase approach. It doesn't matter if you're an insider threat. It doesn't matter if you are a financially motivated threat actor, a nation state threat actor. It doesn't matter who you are, you walk through an intrusion in a very logical way. You may use different tools, you may use different tactics or techniques, but it boils down to a very simplistic path of intrusion. So let's talk about this at a very high level here, because it's also going to form a little bit of a baseline. We talked about digital forensics and response as a baseline. Now we're starting to build upon that. So 5 phases. Initial intrusion vectors you saw in the last polling question, IIV. This is logically the door of your house. This is how the bad guy gets in. This is where they start. Most traditionally, some type of reconnaissance. They identify a patient 0. They identify a victim or a target. The house they want to break into. This is the beginning. Phase 2, persistence. Okay, they've broken into the house, your home. They have now their foothold, right? And sometimes there's maybe tools, tactics, techniques that may not fall perfectly into one of the phases. The story here that we want to try to explain when we're talking to our general audience is about what happened, right? They wake up one day and they've been encrypted with ransomware. As we do the forensics, we work backwards and we fill in the parts of the story. And as we want to explain that story, we want to talk about the phases. So what normally comes after they break into the house? Some way to stay in the house. They unlock a proverbial back door. They open a proverbial window in the house so that if they need to go back out and get a tool, they can come back in. If the Rottweiler in the house runs to the front door, they can sneak out and come in a back door. That is, in essence, persistence. Most commonly, from us on the forensic side, we see a threat actor drop a secondary tool, some type of software that lets them stay in the environment or continue talking and moving through systems. So persistence. How do we persist inside of this home we've broken into? And then they have to logically do something. If I've never been in your home before and I've broken in with my crowbar and I'm trying to steal something from the home, what do I normally do? I start looking around, right? If you think about it from a perspective, if you first time you go in to buy a house, what do you do with a realtor? You explore, you get a tour. You've never been there. You don't know what's what. So now we move to escalation. Third phase of the path of intrusion. We are trying to figure out where in this house do we keep the valuables? Where does this hallway go? What's behind this door? The analogy for the house I like because it is very similar to how a threat actor moves through a network, whether in the cloud or traditionally in an office. The network, the interconnection of computers, services, software, servers is a good house analogy. I'm moving from one computer to another computer. Hence, escalation typically is just John.doe, Jane.doe. I may not have the access I need to get into that other locked room, right? So I figure out how to get there. I use tools to escalate and maintain my persistence in the environment. Fourth phase. This is the one that is really the most important. I can explore the entire house, but the moment now that I have viewed sensitive information, I have accessed and opened the drawer with the jewelry in it, or I have now acquired, put it in my bag, and left the house, we have what we call the fourth phase or the fourth stage of the path of intrusion. Data at risk. And this is really one of the most critical pieces because regardless of jurisdiction, regardless of regulator, regardless of state in the US, country in the EU, outside of EMEA, in Asia Pacific, it doesn't matter where you are. There are country, state, federal, provincial laws that govern personal information, health information, data that defines you uniquely. So what do we care about really and fundamentally in forensics? How they maintain their persistence in the environment, how they move through the environment so we understand how to kick them out, contain them, reset credentials, but then what is it they viewed or accessed or acquired? There's what they viewed or accessed as they're moving through the house, and there's what they stole. All of that in totality is data at risk. And then last phase, end goal. The end goal can be different based on the threat actor. And we have a slide where we're going to talk to the different threat actors out there. But the end goal really can be different depending on who the threat actor is. Financially motivated threat actors, they want to be paid, or they want to reroute wire transfers. They want to make sure that paycheck is deposited to a different account and they can steal it. Nation-state threat actors, getting a little ahead of myself and stealing my thunder from a future slide, but nation-state threat actors, they want to take your data and use it to advance some type of military or economic research. So this is kind of the path of intrusion, 5 phases distilled down, and that is what we're going to talk about as you see us walk through some other slides. Let's go to the next
in
one.
Here really quick too.
Please.
Quick. Yeah.
No, please.
To jump to that question that we had earlier about when should we bring legal counsel in, I think looking at these 5 phases demonstrates exactly why we want legal counsel in at that early initial intrusion vector. During these phases, in addition to everything that's going on from a forensic standpoint, we also may need communications going out to customers or to employees. Each one of these phases, there really is a role for legal counsel to be jumping in. So just wanted to throw that in there just to obviously do a little advertisement for legal counsel. But once again, I think this really shows the reason that legal counsel should be in there from that first phase onward.
Totally agree. Next slide. Okay, so path of email intrusion. I'm not going to go as in-depth as I just went in the last slide, but in the interconnected world of modern businesses, there's kind of what we have historically looked at for the last 10 to 20 years of digital forensics and intrusions in the traditional office network. And there's kind of the modern cloud. It is rare anymore that people have email on an Exchange server sitting in their office. We are almost all leveraging some cloud third-party email provider. Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, GoDaddy, AOL even sometimes. We're leveraging some third-party provider. So why do we have kind of a separate path of intrusion just for email? Because while the 5 phases still are exactly as we've talked through them, some of the particularities of each phase are unique. For the initial intrusion vector in an email account, it's almost always some type of phishing email. And I'm sure all of you in your annual corporate, law firm, or consultant trainings go through and you know what a phishing email is. But there's an evolution to that. And you're going to start seeing businesses adopt passkeys. They're going to move away from just multi-factor authentication, things that we can talk about in a future webinar. But the initial intrusion vector is, how do I get into the email account? And why are we even talking about email accounts for a second? Email intrusions are the number one most common incident that anyone on this bridge works, whether on the consultant side or the law firm side. Yes, threat actors get into networks, threat actors get into cloud environments, but email environments are target rich and they're extremely low cost for targeting. So we have this path of intrusion for email. What's one of the end goals, though, specifically? If you had asked me this question 5 years ago, it would have almost 99.9% almost always been financially motivated. Get an email account, identify if the email account has access to invoices, payroll, and try to redirect or interrupt those. What is happening currently in the last 2 quarters of this year is we're seeing an evolution for business email compromises, where threat actor groups are leveraging the access to steal data from SharePoint, steal data from third-party single sign-on connected systems, and then extort the victim for not publishing of that data. It's a very interesting trend from an incident response perspective. And it also goes to the kind of the rest of the theme of our presentation today, specifically on knowing where your data is and understanding the level of access your employees have to data. Threat actors are moving beyond the simple business email compromise and trying to get it an invoice or redirect payment. They are now leveraging their expertise in that access to take the full realm of data accessible within SharePoint, OneDrive, etc., so they can use that for extortion. And in some cases, the level of access an employee has is very broad. Let's keep going to the next slide. All right, threat landscape. So I stole a little bit of my thunder 2 slides ago. Well, let's talk about the threat landscape for a second. So we've talked about the path of intrusion. We've talked about digital forensic science and incident response. Who are the bad guys and the bad girls and the funny Sesame Street character sounding names, from Shiny Hunters to Akira to all the threat actor groups that are out there? There's over 600 uniquely named threat actor groups in the globe, not to mention all the different vendors and how we all kind of name and give different monikers to different threat actor groups. What does it really boil down to? Regardless of what the name is today or name is tomorrow or what shows up on an OFAC list that you can't pay, threat actors are motivated from a hacktivism standpoint, a government nation state, or what we commonly have referred to in recent years as advanced persistent threat, and organized knee crime. I'm going to talk about initial access brokers here in a second. So 3 real groups are the buckets of our main, or the majority of what we see from a consultant and a law firm standpoint. Hacktivism. Typically, religious or politically motivated messaging, the defacement of a website, and the replacement of that website with some type of an ideological message. That is traditional hacktivism. It's less than 3% of what LevelBlue sees globally. Typically, we see this in the Middle East. Typically, we see within various distinct industry verticals, usually in the biopharmaceutical type markets, where there are certain groups that do not want testing in certain ways or products created and manufactured in certain ways. So hacktivism, to deface, to attack some third party and replace it with an ideologically motivated message. Most common version of hacktivism. Nation state. This is probably 20 to 30% of what LevelBlue investigates or responds to. This is, if I were to boil this down in the most simplistic of terms, government v. government. If everyone remembers kind of the comic and the cartoon from the black and white comic of the Spy versus Spy from many, many, many years ago, from Todd and I's childhood, that is literally what we're talking about here. This is the government of X country targeting information from the government of Y country. Every single country on the face of this planet does it, from the US to others. And what I mean by this is, it's not necessarily the fact that you're going to see an IP address or you're going to see the domain of another country. You're going to see potentially the theft of your data because it helps advance economic or military or research and development of another country. We commonly refer to this, and when I was in the FBI, we refer to this as the fulfillment of an intelligence collection requirement. If one country does not have a particular advancement, or they do not have the monetary or research capabilities, they will identify who else in the world does, and they will leverage a campaign to steal that information to advance their own intelligence collection requirements. Organized and e-crime, third group. This is very much probably 50 to 60% of what almost all the consultants in this call, and I imagine the lawyers in this call, deal with every single day. Organized and e-crime is exactly what it sounds like. It's organized groups, sometimes lone wolves, but organized groups that are financially motivated, whether that's ransomware, invoice redirect fraud, payroll redirect fraud, some type of I'm going to do a bad thing so I can get money. And the probably simplest way to describe why, of course, money motivates many. But when you look at, I have a chapter in my book about this, when you look at kind of the annual salary for many blue collar, white collar workers in certain countries in the globe where a lot of this is proliferated from, if the annual salary target is typically, say, the equivalent of 18 to 22,000 US dollar equivalent for a white collar, blue collar job, and you potentially can get 100,000 or 500,000 US dollar equivalent from one ransomware attack as a payout, unfortunately, the dollars and cents motivate. And that is why we see threat actors sometimes focusing on this from a financial motivation standpoint. So I have initial access brokers with the arrow kind of below this. And the reason why is initial access brokers something that really didn't exist more than 8 to 10 years ago. All of these groups did what they did in their own little bubbles. Initial access brokers, or IABs, are kind of a unique aspect. They are just like you might work with to buy a house, a broker. But initial access brokers are there to identify a vulnerability, identify a weakness, identify a path into the house, stop, and resell that access. Every one of the groups in the bubbles that I've talked about prior are motivated to purchase access and move more quickly through the path of intrusion. So initial access brokers are actually part of a criminal ecosystem, whether we talk about it on the dark web or we talk about it on password protected forums. Absolutely, there are groups where their sole purpose to exist is to weaponize vulnerabilities, gain access to victims, compromise credentials, and resell that access for someone else to continue. Last one on this slide, insider threats. Insider threats are an interesting one. We absolutely work insider threats. Often we call these compromise assessments, or we call these bad leavers, bad arrivers, whatever category or term you want to use. Insider threats, someone who has placement and access and authority to have access to information, and they abuse that trust of the organization, either on their way out the door or while they're at a company to steal information for a competitor. It's absolutely a category of the threat landscape, but the majority of what we deal with every single day is organized and e-crime. Todd, anything to add on this slide before we move on, sir, from your perspective?
No, nothing other than all of these are bad for our clients, no matter what the source or the origin is. So interesting. I like the breakdown as far as where the numbers are coming from. That's kind of where I was feeling also, as far as the threats, but it all just results in bad stuff for our clients. So thank you.
Absolutely. Next slide. All right, so attack surfaces. I'm not going to spend too long on this one. Look, the majority of us are watching this webinar right now, either from an iPad, a laptop, or a phone, the most common things, right? So the attack surfaces, 5 phases of activity. What I want to focus on, you can look at the icons and read the word for yourself. I think they all make complete sense to the audience. Ask questions by all means in the chat if they do not. But what's the most important thing is the human. So why do I have human as an attack surface? Because it is unfortunately, and typically the weakest link in any enterprise or any organization. Let's leave AI completely to the side, and we'll talk about that in a future webinar. Humans, what do we naturally do? We trust, we communicate, we sometimes take things for granted. We fall into patterns. What do threat actors love to do? Take advantage of the patterns. And so you can have the strongest security in any organization. But what we have seen in the last 2 to 3 quarters, including end of last year, is certain threat actor groups evolving. I say evolving. Frankly, and honestly, if you've been in this industry long enough, what started out as pen testing and leaving thumb drives in parking lots 20 years ago as a form of social engineering is exactly what we're seeing threat actors return to. So I call it evolution because for some that are newer to this, they've not kind of dealt with that over the last 20, 30 years. But it is social engineering at its best. It is calling the help desk and impersonating an employee and getting past the security questions and getting a device added to an account. It's social engineering. It doesn't matter that you have all of the great security, you have great patch management, you may know where your data is. You have threat actor groups who are returning to the basics. How do I attack the human? How do I bypass extraneous security mechanisms by just getting the human convinced I am who I am? This is what we also see in wire transfers all the time, where we see an email arrive. Hey, I actually need to update this banking and wiring information. Yes, this is approved, or the CEO is not available, but I have the authority on this. Okay, great, thank you. And we approve it. Threat actors know this, they take advantage of it. So of all the attack surfaces, I think the most important one to highlight, and why we always harp on tabletop exercises, incident response planning, and constant employee education from real world events, is humans often are the weakest link. Next slide. Okay, known vulnerabilities per year. One of the reasons why I like talking about this slide, I'm just going to talk about it very briefly, we're going to keep going, is the fact that in the age of artificial intelligence and all of the kind of what I will almost jokingly refer to as pre-IPO hype, or now IPO hyped up information, is that we are entering a world in which the compression of the path of intrusion, where it may have taken weeks before, we are really looking at that compression now into days quite often, where a threat actor gets in, they move very quickly, and sometimes they're done in hours. What used to be 1 to 2 weeks, where honestly, back when I was in the FBI, going back almost in greater than a decade, we would see nation-state threat actors in networks for years. It is much more common now to see almost kind of the smash and grab tactic. So, known vulnerabilities per year. Why is this slide important? Because from a CVE database standpoint, critical from a vulnerability standpoint, anytime a vulnerability comes out, we have patch management processes. We have to identify where the vulnerabilities are in an environment. We have to patch those. And most routinely, we still see vulnerabilities that are several months old being weaponized and exploited by threat actors, because patch management in this day and age, given the ramp and constant increase of vulnerabilities, it's hard. So for those of you on this call that are involved in your organizations and you are tasked or responsible to manage risk within your organization, this should be something top of mind, if not already, for 2027 budget purposes. Because as you can see from the chart, and this is not just LevelBlue data, this is open source global data from tracking of vulnerabilities. We are going to surpass that this year. Every single year, CVEs, public identification of those has increased. It's not a problem that's going away. So patch management should absolutely be number one. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Best practices in incident response. One of the things you will often see, no matter who the consultant team is you bring in to help, hopefully at the direction of counsel in that three-party arrangement, is you're going to see the incident response team walk through a playbook. Depending, and let's just talk about it from the financial crime, the threat actors that are motivated by financial gain. Typically by the time a client or a victim has identified there's something wrong, we've identified that they've reached that fifth phase, the end goal. And I hate to say it from a perspective of percentages, it's high 90th percentile that most victims identify something's wrong when that threat actor has gotten all the way through the path of intrusion. Even with modern security operations centers or managed detection and response teams, threat actors move very, very quickly. So when we are being brought in from a consultant standpoint, when Todd and I are coming in, we're looking to advise a client, a victim of a path of intrusion by a threat actor, we are going to recommend a series of things guided by the investigation, guided by the facts. And I'll let you read the bullets for yourself from an audience perspective, but these are some examples of common guidance we're going to give. Not always blanket or every time, but if a threat actor has compromised credentials, usernames and passwords, the identities of, say, Todd and I as employees of a company that has been victimized, you're going to see the recommendation of the consultant to not only reset our credentials, probably reset broader permissions and credentials within the organization, and then have a follow-on to tightened tighten down credentialed access. Because what did the threat actor do? They were successful. They navigated through a path of intrusion. They moved very, very quickly. They viewed, they accessed, they exfiltrated data, and they reached their end goal. So not only is it getting the client contained and back to operation, it's trying to raise those proverbial castle walls around the house to prevent a reoccurrence. One of the third bullet here, treat identity as the primary control plane, not endpoints. 10 years ago, EDR, 10 to 15 years ago, endpoint detection response technology. Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike Falcon, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, Palo Alto Cortex, doesn't matter which EDR you like the most, named any EDR that's out there. That was kind of top of mind. Buy EDR, this is the silver bullet, this is the armor across your network. So everything we've been talking about, Todd and I have been talking about today, has been actually moving back to where threat actors are pivoting back to compromise of the identity of the human. Because now that there's fairly good security in many, many client environments, what does the threat actor want to do? They want to be Devon. They want to be Todd. They want to be Yogi because they want to move through that environment as a baseline. They want to move through the hallways of your house and appear as you. They don't want the Rottweiler and the security system knowing that something's wrong. They want to log into systems with usernames and passwords, an identity that's trusted because it doesn't send up the warning bells or the alarms. They don't want to use malicious software, we call malware, to try to steal things. They want to come in with an identity that's trusted. So treat identity as the primary control plane, no matter what the organization is doing. One of the things that we often find on the consultant side as a need is true confirmation and inventory of where the identities are. User accounts and service accounts. Service accounts are typically automated, non-interactive accounts that allow software applications or different parts of networks to talk to each other. And they often have broad or overbroad privileges. Threat actors love those. To the build response around timeline and reconstruction, our goal from a forensics perspective is to preserve evidence, contain a threat, and move quickly through our investigative piece. But the timeline becomes a central artifact for decision-making, that last bullet. Why? Because at the time we find certain things and we present those findings from a consultancy standpoint, we are advising legal counsel so they can then make the legal interpretation based on the forensic findings. But we have to do it in a controlled way. We have to preserve evidence in a controlled way. And we also have to try to minimize the business interruption, the BI, so we can get the company back up and running. A good consultancy will absolutely be able to navigate and expeditiously move through that process to try to minimize the business being down. Next slide. I am seeing some questions. I'm going to get to those in just a second. I'll try to type some answers. Todd, I think you have a slide coming up. Oh, this is another good one. So best practices in incident response. Let's talk about this for a second. One of the reasons why forensics teams like mine, forensics teams like those others that are on the call, the reason why we have playbooks, the reason why we have experience to guide through pieces is because of going back to my analogy of raising that castle wall around the house. We know certain threat actor groups love to come back. We also know certain initial access brokers sell access multiple times. So it's not just about restoring systems, resetting some passwords. It's about understanding that full path of intrusion from how they got in all the way to what their end goal was. Every single phase in that path of intrusion matters because one missed remote access tool for persistence, one missed how they got in initial intrusion vector or vulnerability can weaken that attempt to raise the castle walls. This is why often sometimes clients get a little tired of the consultants being in their environment for many, many weeks because we have a focus on trying to move through a stepped process to really heal and leave the environment better than we found it if we're going to try to do the best job. We never want a threat actor coming back in. So assume persistence and assume reentry. Even though statistically several threat actor groups out there do not care about re-victimizing, depending on who the bad apples are, remember we're dealing with criminals, it is very common still to see either a net new threat actor or an initial access broker resell the access to another threat actor to try to re-victimize. If you were attacked once and it was successful, why not try again? So our goal is always from a posture perspective, understanding all those missing pieces in the puzzle, reconstructing the timeline, the path of intrusion, so we can effectively attest that we have full containment, threat actor ejection, and we're leaving the victim, the business, the client better than the way we found them. Treat data exposure as the primary objective. Fourth phase of the path of intrusion. What was viewed? What was accessed? What was acquired? From a contractual standpoint, from a legal standpoint, and even though it may not be top of mind day one, maybe even day 15 of an investigation getting back and running, we always think from a consultancy standpoint. I don't want to speak from Todd, but I know he always thinks this from a legal perspective, as well as the Constangy team. What happens in a year from now? What happens with a class action? What happens with the potential for litigation? Every decision, every step, every piece we move through during an investigation in those early hours, early days, chain of custody, proper preservation of evidence, documentation of action, sets up, hopefully, for success in the prevention or the proper argument against future litigation, especially in a very litigious world we live in. Todd, anything to add to that, sir, before we go to the next slide?
No, I mean, you said litigation, and my ears kind of perked up there a little bit. So
perfect. Next slide.
Polling question number 3. When an organization discovers a potential cyber incident, what should be the first containment priority? A. Disconnect all affected devices immediately. B. Notify customers and regulators. C. Contain compromised identities by resetting credentials, revoking tokens, and invalidating sessions. D. Begin rebuilding affected systems. That question again. When an organization discovers a potential cyber incident, what should be the first containment priority? A. Disconnect all affected devices immediately. B. Notify customers and regulators. C. Contain compromised identities by resetting credentials, revoking tokens, and invalidating sessions. D. Begin rebuilding affected systems. Okay, we'll give you a few, not a minute, but somewhere in that time frame. Devon, Todd, any comments, or you want to take any other questions?
one of the things that I heard, and I sort of wanted to jump in, was just talking about when Devon was talking a little bit about how the threat actors were getting back to the fundamentals. And I find that so interesting. But it's also important, I think, too, to see our clients start to get back to the fundamentals as well. You know, looking at things and maybe not relying on, Devon, I don't mean to offend, technology as much as we once did, getting in there and doing that employee training, letting employees know that, you know, they're that first line of defense. And if they're making calls, if they, you know, don't look right, spotting the red flags and then having an action plan in place where all employees, whatever level that they are in the organization, knows what to do when they've spotted a red flag. So getting back to those fundamentals is something that the threat actors can do, but that's something that our clients can do as well.
Awesome. Let's see those results. And 38% disconnect all affected devices immediately. 1% notify customers and regulators. 61% contain compromised identities by resetting credentials, revoking tokens, and invalidating sessions. And 0% begin rebuilding affected systems. Pass it back to you two.
I love the contain compromised identities leading the pack there, because that's pretty much exactly what you were going to typically see from a legal and DFIR consultancy playbook, right? We're going to identify, help contain, we're going to establish tooling in place, whether it is a tool to augment your tech stack, or we're going to add some additional forensic tools into the environment to exactly this. What identities does the threat actor have access to? Whether all of them or some of them, how do we reset those properly to help with that containment step? And how do we help revoke active sessions to kick them out, eject them, and then make sure we're moving through business restoration processes? Let's keep going. I know we're down to about 5 minutes. I want to make sure we get through the rest of our slides.
Great. So,
Todd?
In the time that we have left, I want to talk a little bit about what do we do with this great advice that we got from Devon, or what do we do with the great advice that we hear when we go through an engagement that we get from the digital forensics folks. As far as, we went through a tough incident. I guess the silver lining there, if there is any, is that we get to learn a lot about the security that our organization had in place, both before the incident as well as during the incident, and then all after the incident as well. So one of the things that we deal with is when we get this great advice, as far as, breaking down from a digital forensic standpoint, what happened, you're going to obviously see recommendations come out of that. Especially when you're dealing with somebody from the forensic side of things, they're most likely going to have some suggestions as to what could be done moving forward, or even perhaps what could have been done to some degree to maybe lessen that risk. Not, of course, avoid the risk entirely, but just to lessen it at the very least. That's also something that we're going to hear from our clients, is what could we have done? So we rely, in looking at this issue, on what would be the federal rules of evidence, in particular, Rule 407, addressing subsequent remedial measures. And so we did put up the rule here, and it's when measures are taken that would have made an earlier injury or harm less likely to occur. Evidence of those measures is not admissible. So it's not admissible in perhaps the data breach case down the road. When you take these steps, the point behind this is the courts, I think the intent is to make sure that people act on this advice to fix those problems, hopefully, and not discourage it. I think we see this sort of reasoning come out of, to take it out of the privacy or cyber context. If somebody has a sidewalk that has a crack in it, which caused somebody to fall, we want the landowner to fix that sidewalk and not let other people come and trip on that same crack. And we don't want that evidence of fixing that crack in the sidewalk to be used against the individual that had that issue in the first place. So we're always looking at evidence from this standpoint, and that's one of the reasons, as far as, why counsel is so protective when we do see recommendations come through. Things like, if there's recommendations about patching a vulnerability, those can be misinterpreted. So exceptions to the rule obviously would be when it's going to be, proof that, or I'm sorry, the exceptions would be that evidence can be admitted for impeachment purposes. So if some overconfident, tech person said that there could never be an incident happening, that could be used to breach, or that could be used to impeach that witness down the road. So we just wanted to keep context here as to what we're doing with the great recommendations that we might get during an investigation. So the next slide talks a little bit about the law in interpreting subsequent remedial actions, which admittedly is pretty scant in the context of cyber. A couple of cases we have here. I wanted to give two separate cases, and if you want the sites, please reach out to us. But the first case we have, which is related to a data breach case, is out of the Sixth Circuit, where the court found that the recommendation of the defendant, that is the person, unfortunately, that had the incident, the recommendation that they put a freeze on their credit reports could be used against them to show sort of the severity of the incident. So what we see there is basically that recommendation that you have to individuals after an incident being used against you. Of course, there's a split there. In the Third Circuit, a year after, the Court of Appeals, the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, rejected an argument that credit monitoring could be used as proof that there was a significant risk of harm. So we're seeing different things going on there. Really too, and we could do a presentation in and of itself on this issue, but we always see counsel talk a lot about forensic reports from, post-incident. And this is why we are so careful with forensic reports during that time. So I would love to get into that as much as I could, but I know we at least have a couple more minutes here, and I want to reserve time for questions as well.
Okay, I know we're tight on time, so I just want to talk about this very briefly. You're more than welcome to reach out. We can always do this on a future webinar. One of the most interesting things we've highlighted today is around these social engineering. What you're going to see here on the screen is exactly an example. That's the real world scenario in which a threat actor called a help desk. They provide information to impersonate a member of IT. They actually did it 3 times. And 3 times we had the voice recordings from the call. After we were engaged, we listened to a very US sounding individual focused on these calls. They got their password reset, logged in the environment as an illegitimate employee, and they moved through the environment to steal data and ultimately extort that. The takeaway here, as we are kind of now at time, is strict authentication procedures, moving to passkeys, as well as employee training to include with your third-party outsourced providers, your help desks. They should get the same level of training as your internal employees do. Do we have another slide? Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Devon, Todd, thank you. Fascinating. Always more information to give than time we have, but thank you very much for your presentations today. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and have a great day out there. We'll talk soon.